try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for.
Greetings. Welcome to VFI Educates, episode number 246. Wow. Since June of year 2000. We're delighted you joined us today. We have an interesting program. I do have a couple of quick announcements, and then Ilana will introduce our guest speaker this afternoon, Adrian. And first one is that last week's episode 245 is now up on YouTube. Also, we have a new index to YouTube, which you can acquire by simply typing into your browser tinyurl.com/VFI educates and the number 5. And that'll bring you to an index which will index all of the 200 some videos that we have in our library on YouTube. Next week's episode will feature Dan Pomerantz. He has spoken with us 3 times maybe or more. He is a news reporter essentially out of Jerusalem from Chicago, but he's an attorney living in Israel. And he has headed up his own company. He's pretty fairly well known in the industry of news, and he'll give us a lecture. And there's no shortage of news. It's like we live in the Jeopardy round of constant news happening by the hour.
So the title just changed. The title just changed to add more.
Yeah, he'll have plenty to talk about, and he's very well informed. So the next announcement is that we do have a one-page front and back marketing slick. That's a marketing word for a advertising piece. It's full color, it's on glossy paper, and it describes the 6 programs we're currently running, Volunteers for Israel. All 6 are described, plus lots of information and details on the program. The reason I'm mentioning it here is that we had about 300 of these printed, and we've distributed a fair number. And if you belong to an organization, synagogue, church, any place really, and you think other people would be interested in seeing this, if you put your email, or even better, if you can email me your mailing address, that is your postal mailing address, I will send you a handful of copies that you can distribute. It'll cost you nothing. It'll be helpful to us, and it's a very pretty piece. So I will ask Ilana to put my email address into the chat, and if you can just send me your postal mailing address, I will respond and send you copies of the slick. And thank you for your cooperation in advance. Last announcement is we've just announcing a new VFI Plus Advanced program, 9 days in Israel, volunteering from February 14th to the 22nd. Out-of-pocket costs are roughly $2,100 plus your airfare round trip. And it is going to be an interesting episode on episodic volunteering based on the current needs in Israel at that time, plus touring with Julia. It's a 9-day program. And again, the dates are February 14th to 22nd. You can see more details. They are on our website as of this morning, and that is at vfi-usa.org. End of my messages for today. I'm now leaving you with Ilana.
Okay, I have a few things here. I just want to make a note. Judith Ford, hi. When I mute you, could you just stay muted? I noticed that. So I want to introduce our speaker. Let me get there first. I have a few things. I'll actually be sharing part of his presentation because one of his computers is not working, so just bear with me. So we have Adrian Weisberg speaking to us today. Adrian was born and educated in England, where he led an apolitical Zionist youth organization and actively supported Soviet Jewry through his work with the Jewish Agency, including visits to the USSR. In 1981, he fulfilled his dream of making Aliyah and began his career in Israel as a production engineer for Holgat Bagir. He later co-owned and served as marketing and sales director for a printing services company in Tel Aviv's financial district, a role he held for 23 years. And since 2009, Adrian has embraced a fulfilling third career as a licensed tour guide in Israel, specializing in guiding North American visitors, aside from interruptions during COVID and the current conflict. He resides in central Israel, is married, and takes pride in his family, which includes 2 daughters and 3 grandchildren. So welcome, Adrian. Thanks so much for coming to talk to the group. And if you could unmute, then
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just trying to send you two more documents.
Okay.
Because I managed to convert something from one of those Microsoft WebP documents into a JPEG. So I'll just send that.
Okay.
It's all basically we're going to be looking at maps of the Oslo Agreement, the initial agreement and the follow-up agreement. I was going to basically we're talking about Judea and Samaria, but I think it's important to take a little peek at Gaza briefly, just to understand the whole thing, especially in the light of the terminology of the two-state solution. We have like 3 different areas. So I just want to send you these. Let's take a moment. Go back a little bit further, but we're gonna have to put one of the maps up that shows the.
Sure. You tell me what to share.
Right,
and
I'll tell you which one, but I need to send you these others. So just 1 second.
You said Israel PLO interim, right?
Yeah, my younger daughter works with 2 screens, and her husband works with 2 screens in the same work from home room, and it's crazy. I don't know how you do it.
I'm used to 3. I have 1. So.
Okay, this map. If we look at it, the darker blue area represents the post-armistice 1948 Israel, and the area which is in the different colors to the right of that in the kidney shape represent the armistice lines with the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, Transjordan as it was, signed in February 1949, after the War of Independence. These were never recognized borders. They were only ever armistice agreements. Why is that? Same with the Sinai border and the same with the border of the Golan Heights. The reason for that is that the parties that these armistice agreements were negotiated with insisted that they were not recognized as borders, but they were only armistice agreements. Now, strangely enough, if you go on Google today, Google Maps, and you come to anywhere in Israel which is near this kidney shape, you will see that it still shows the armistice agreements lines as if they have some sort of international standing in international law. The fact is that they were never ratified by multiple parliaments, which means they're not actually international law. They simply represent bipartisan agreements between the state of Israel and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. So if you hear the expression, what we're looking at now is what people around the dark blue line that you follow around the northern part of it, north of the Jerusalem corridor, we refer to as Samaria, and the southern bit is referred to as Judea. That is in traditional terms. However, what we need to look into basically, as you can see, the the sort of dark tan colors, those are areas of conurbations of Palestinian Arab communities, defined themselves as Palestinians basically just shortly before the 6-day war, when Jordan lost all this territory in a war with Israel. So those areas are the high population centers of the main towns of the Arab communities in Judea and in Samaria. And this becomes referred to in the Oslo agreements as Area A. What you also see are the yellow colors, and there's some sort of mixed color down on the south part. We'll talk about that. That's a later agreement in Netanyahu's first round. But the yellow areas are referred to as Area B, and everything else in the sort of light gray color is referred to as Area C. So what are they made up of? Area A was intended in the Second Inter-Agreement of 1995 to become under total Palestinian Authority control. The Palestinian Authority was only established in 1993 by the PLO, basically, when their leaders came from Tunis. I can't say back because, Arafat was an Egyptian, but it doesn't really matter. So they moved back and they made their headquarters in Ramallah. if you look at the north of the Jerusalem corridor, you can see it's not very good resolution, but you can see there Ramallah. Above that is a place called Beth El, or in the Arabic version of that is Beitin. And to the right of that is an area called El Bira, which is where the university is in Ramallah. And then, however, El Bira was always a Christian town, whereas Ramallah was always a Muslim town. If we look further north, we have the area of Jenin in the far north of the West Bank area. We have Tulkarem, we have Qalqilia on the left-hand edges, and Qalqilia actually sits opposite Netanya. And at this point, Israel is 9 miles wide. So, Jenin is in the top there. Now you see the brown area in the top. The continuum of that brown area was a later concession by Israel that was given one-sided when they decided to remove 3 or 4 small settlements from the area and make that entire contiguous area part of extending Area A. To the right of the bottom of the screen, you can see Jericho. Jericho also, together with the refugee camps to the north of it, which are basically townships, was also put into part of Area A. The heavily populated areas of Bethlehem, Beit Sahur, and Beit Jala, those are 2 towns, Christian towns, which were immediately east and west of Bethlehem. That became Area A close to Jerusalem. And then, of course, all around Hebron and Carmel, which is basically biblical Carmel, not the Mount Carmel, the Carmel where, if you remember the story where David meets Abishag and that very silly husband of hers called Naval, which means idiot. I'm sure that wasn't his name his mother gave him, but never mind. And then on the right there, we have the area around Yatta, which again takes its name from a second large community. Now, what you see now between Bethlehem and Kiryat Arba Yatta is like a diagonal lines within the yellow. And that's because the status of that area was changed under the Hebron agreements that was signed by Netanyahu around about 1999, which put observers in who don't really do much, like most observers, but basically make sure that there is free access for both Jews and Christians to Jews and Muslims, this doesn't go anywhere actually, to the important sites in Hebron. So what we have following the second agreement, maybe we should just pick up the other map at the moment this is the interim agreement. It was the first agreement, and look at the slightly more detailed second agreement, which is in the other Oslo map, if I can.
Map of areas A and B.
Let me just see what it's called.
Map of areas A, B?
Yeah, map of area A, B, C, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, wonderful. So over here you can see on the Oslo 2, the definitions were made a little bit tighter of what is A, what is B, and what is C. There were additions made. The status of Jericho changed, the status of Beit Sahor changed, the status of an area just to the left of Nablus changed, and around Jenin. These became major, they were the major Palestinian cities, and the brown area became Area B. That was yellow in our previous map, and of course everything else in grey becomes Area C. So what we have basically from the second Oslo agreements in 1995 is that the West Bank no longer exists. We can call it that if we want to, because it doesn't really exist. It existed for 19 years. What we have are basically a system of cantons where Area A is absolute Palestinian control, security control, municipal control, education control, electricity control, cellular control, everything is totally under the Palestinian Authority. Area B, the brown areas, and the Area A is actually, the other map is more accurate, but Area B, the brown areas became areas of semi-rural, but with large villages. Large villages of Palestinian population. They represented about 20% of the population of what was the West Bank. And these are areas in which the Palestinian Authority, according to the agreement, has total municipal control. They have control of absolutely everything, basically, except for security. Security is under the Israeli civil administration and the IDF. Area C is everywhere else, and Area C was agreed was going to be under total Israeli control, both security and municipal. However, anyone in areas A and B is completely free to travel around anywhere they want in Area C. And this is very, very significant when we come to the section I'm going to talk about a little bit later on employment, because our lecture today is about, where does this area go from here forward. So this was the Oslo Maps. These were the agreements that were made, and it was supposed to be a stage agreement whereby they went into a phase 3, let's call it, in finding a way to better coagulate the areas A and B, connect them more, make more decisions about how they were going to be actually run, because it's littered. In the time of the Oslo Agreements, 1993, there were 200,000 Jews living in Judea and Samaria. Today, that number is getting close to 500,000. So the concept of, uprooting settlements and things like that, I mean, it's outside the essence of the Oslo Agreements. It was never discussed that way. They were always going to be part of Israel, and then the Palestinians were offered other land in the south attached to the Gaza Strip as a compensation for those little areas. The grey area you see all along the east, the right-hand side, right near where it says Jordan and where it says Palestine, where it says Jericho, this was something from the very blue dot at the top of that, right the way down to the outskirts of Jerusalem and Jebel Mukabra and those Arab neighborhoods of Jerusalem, they're in the brown, and Jericho and down to the Dead Sea. That was an area where the Labour government under Golda Meir, and then later under her foreign minister, who was eventually supposed to succeed her as prime minister, but he unfortunately died rather young. His name was Yigal Allon. He was the first commander of the Palmach, born in the Jezreel Valley and spent the rest of his life on Kibbutz Ginosar. So he created something called the Allon Plan. Again, this was part of geopolitics. The Allon Plan stated there is absolutely no Arab population whatsoever in the entire eastern half of the pretty much wilderness regions of Judea and Samaria, and therefore we should build a road and we should form secular settlements there in order to make sure that we protect our border from the east. And remember, look, we've got to look back into the 90s. Saddam Hussein, with his Iraqi what have you, was threatening to invade us from the east through Jordan. And basically, we were very concerned about having the Iraqi army show up as they did in 1948. So these communities were established in 1968, 1969, 1970 to 72, are stripped all the way along the east, and there's still no Arab population in any of those areas, except for little dots you can see at the top of that map in brown. So this is what we have. We have this sort of like spread out canton area where there is actually contiguous control for the Palestinian Authority with access of roads through it for anyone, for Jews, Arabs, or anybody. And because of Yasser Arafat's launching of the first Intifada, and then especially in 1986, 87, and then again the 2000 Intifada, the suicide bombings that Arafat was sending into Israel and they were terrible things. Poor families basically being coerced into drugged youngsters taking explosives packs and finding that, and then having help to get into Israel's main population centers and blowing themselves up together with many, many civilians. There were more, I think the last year before the war was started construction, there were 1,100 Israelis killed and more than 11,000 were maimed because their explosive devices were full of ball bearings and jagged pieces of foundry metal. It was pretty atrocious. The wall was constructed, but it was never fully completed. Parts of it are very visible if you go on Route 6 in the eastern side of Israel today, through the past Petah Tikva, places like that. You'll see it looks like a solid wall, but it's only a solid wall where there are population centers. everywhere else, all the south of the Judean hills, all the Jordan Valley, and all the northern area, and the area all around, you can see the salient near Jerusalem, that is entirely fence. It's just a fence. So, before the Oslo agreements, the main employer of Palestinian men and women, including the factory I lived in, which all the machinists in the Bagir clothing manufacturing factory were from women who were bussed in every day from Gaza and Hebron. Most of the construction industry in Israel, the basic labor force of construction in Israel, were Palestinians. They were involved in all sorts of, let's say, simple labor, non-skilled labor force. And they would just drive from Gaza, from Hebron, from wherever, into the rest of Israel day in. Most of them spoke pretty good Hebrew. They needed it for their jobs. That was the situation. Oslo completely changed that. They were still able to come in and work, but that got very complicated with the first Intifada, and with the second Intifada it became pretty much impossible. They had to be, the Israeli public demanded that there was a proper separation. That's why the wall was built. So that is the case. We have a population in the West Bank today. I believe it is in the region of 3.5 million. What do we have there that is of interest to Jews, for example? Well, if you think about the Tanakh in the Hebrew Bible, the vast majority of sites mentioned in, well, certainly in Genesis, also if you go into, in Bereshit, if you go into Devarim, if you go into the book of Joshua, you go through the Judges, the vast majority of the stories take place within that area, which we refer to as Bank today. So there are very important historical sites such as Shiloh, as Americans call it, which was the capital of Israel for 369 years, where the tabernacle was. It's been heavily excavated over the past 150 years. We have a Hebron where the oldest standing Herodian building is the Cave of Machpelah. The agreement that Netanyahu in his first round as prime minister negotiated back in the late 90s with the PA was that the custodianship of the Cave of Machpelah would be shared, whereby it's split in half all year round. Jews have access to one side of it, and Muslims have access to the other side of it, but they don't actually. They only have access to the top floor, which was built by the Mamelukes in the 1400s. Nobody actually has access to the underground, the inside of what's under the structure. And for 10 days a year, which are chosen by either side, mainly for the Eids in the Islamic calendar, and mainly for the parasha of Chayei Sarah in the Torah reading cycle, and a couple of other days, the whole building goes over to being a synagogue or a mosque. So they wrap up all the books, they cover everything up, and everything becomes a mosque during the Eids, and everything a synagogue during the Chayei Sarah and a few more days. And basically, that's how they share the site. The Tell of Hebron, which is actually even more significant than the Cave of Machpelah, has only been excavated by Israel National Parks Authority and their excavators over the past 10 to 15 years in great detail. And they found unbelievable stuff. I mean, it's literally unbelievable stuff. Not only the biggest mikvaot that have ever been found in the country, bigger than the ones in Jerusalem from the 2nd century, the time just before the revolt that was put down by Hadrian, Bar Kokhba revolt, when all these communities were annihilated. And the Tell itself, there is a wall from the time of Abraham and Ephron. There is a street from that time. It's just incredible archaeology. In Nablus, in Shechem, we have the tomb of Joseph, the traditional site. We can't prove it, but it's the tomb of Joseph. That, over the past 22 years, has been destroyed by Islamic fanatics twice. We have on Mount Ebal, which sits on the top of the ridge, the brown areas in the middle of Samaria, we have we have an Israelite worship site that was uncovered by Professor Adam Zertal, a secular Israeli who was badly wounded in the Yom Kippur War, spent his whole life as an archaeologist on crutches, but he did surveys of 7,000 square kilometers. That's, I don't know how many that is miles, I'm sorry, about 4,500 square miles of Samaria. Found unbelievable stuff, including the layout of 5 footprints in the Jordan Valley, the shape of a footprint, which had classic Israel altars, the remains of thousands of animal bones, all of which were 100% kosher. And then he found one on Mount Ebal, and we read in the book of Joshua, at the end of Deuteronomy, that Joshua created an altar on Mount Ebal, and this is where the 6 tribes on one side and the 6 tribes on the other side, and the Ark of the Covenant through the middle. And this was like the last mass event of the whole of Israel together took place there. That has been partially demolished by a Palestinian Authority construction company and then reconstructed by a Jewish settlement organization. So Jericho also has a lot of ancient remains, including a synagogue from the 1500s. The Spanish Portuguese Jews from the Spanish escaped Spain during the expulsion. And it was actually Jews that re-established both Jericho, Gaza, Jerusalem, being the majority there since the 1500s. But that changed drastically during the British Mandate period. So we have all sorts of historical interest for Jews and for Christians dotted along through the West Bank. I say for Christians too, because there remains of hundreds of Byzantine churches and monasteries throughout Samaria and some in Judea. So we have like religious interests right the way through, and we don't have any, let's say Jews and Christians don't feel that the Palestinian Authority does anything for preservation, that they don't take care of these sites, they don't preserve them, they don't maintain them, and they don't stop construction directly on top of them. So that is a little bit of an issue that would need to be negotiated, how that's going to be handled, and to give free access for people of any religion to these sites of worship and traditional importance. That's our background, okay? So where from today? What has actually been happening in Judea and Samaria in the past, let's say, 10 years? So there is an organization called the American Israeli Economic and Commercial Forum, something like that. It is run by an evangelical Bible teacher and political leader called Heather Johnson, who started out in Birmingham, Alabama. She runs an outward bound ranch in Northern California, and she regularly brings congressional groups to Israel. Any year there's not an election or an interim election, like for senatorial elections, any year there's not that, she brings a small group of legislators to come with her. They get their tour is a mixture of meeting people in Judea and Samaria, both Jews and Arabs, mainly business people, going to Ariel, which is the large Jewish town, which is established in empty space on a hill in the middle of nowhere on the west of Samaria. And these Congress people basically come and they meet different political leaders in Judea and Samaria. With her organization and with the leading Arab businessmen of Hebron, they established in 2015, something called the Judea and Samaria Chamber of Commerce. This includes most of the businesses in the large industrial areas established by Israel in Area C, where 95% of the employment is for Palestinians. It includes the major Arab businesses in Hebron, which is by far it's the biggest town in the West Bank. It includes Ramallah is now bigger. It includes businesses from Ramallah too, and Jenin, and Tulkarem, and Kalkilia. And it has both Jewish businesses and Arab businesses. And their concept is to further trade and employment. Like most Israelis living in Tel Aviv, say, can go down to South Tel Aviv, where all the big furniture places are, right? This is the warehouses, the wholesalers, and so on. And they can buy cabinets for their kitchens, cabinets for their bathrooms, beds, and so on, mattresses, and so on. What they don't realize is they're all manufactured in Hebron. There's actually nothing produced in Israel. It all comes from Hebron. So could you, could you put up that article that I sent you, the link? Because it's a very, very significant thing. What happened was the Trump administration in 2016 sent his son-in-law, I've forgotten his name, Jared Kushner, to the area to try and set up what was already set up, which was basically a business arrangement within the West Bank. So we're going to talk about this man, Ashraf al-Jabari. Hebron is run in a very traditional Arab way by the heads of clans. Ashraf is a guy in his early 50s. The first time he met the congressional tour was at the center, the leadership training center that was set up by Heather Johnson in Ariel, where kids from Jewish schools, Arab schools, and the Israeli and the IDF go and learn all about working as teams. And Ashraf is in charge of the biggest clan in Hebron. As he puts it, I'm responsible for putting food on the table for nearly 30,000 people. Together with him, another 5 business leaders from Hebron came to Ariel, and this was in, what was I guiding this tour? It was in 2018. 2018, we're like 2 years into the Trump administration, and the ambassador at the time, the Jewish ambassador, he agreed. His name is mentioned. I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name, but it's mentioned. If you can scroll a little bit, you will see his name in here. This is Ashraf. Keep going. He didn't speak any English at the time, and the speech he gave in this center in Ariel to the ambassador and all of the US staff. This was the first time ever since 1967 that David Friedman, there you are, thank you very much, that Ambassador Friedman or any official US government group had ever set foot in an Israeli settlement in Judea and Samaria. This was 2015. This is, figure it out, 48 years after the first settlements were established. Anyway, Ashraf didn't speak English. He was speaking in Hebrew. I was translating him. And in one of the pictures in this document, you'll see 4 or 5 people. If we could just find that a little bit further up, the picture of them. We'll have to go down. So it's down. Scroll down and we'll get to this. There you are. There you are. Right. So the man on the right is Avi Zimmerman. He lives in Ariel. He is an activist for the Judea Samaria Chamber of Commerce. The woman next to him is Heather Johnson. She is the head of this organization. Ashraf is in the middle. Another Palestinian businessman on the left, and I forget who the American official is next to Ashraf. So Avi Zimmerman was translating him, and I was translating him, and we were being trying very hard to be politically correct because he was being extremely frank. Basically, he said that we in Hebron don't want anything to do with the Palestinian Authority. They are corrupt to the core. You, the Americans, and the Oslo Agreements and the Israelis imposed on us a cruel mafia who do nothing with our aid money but line their own pockets. What we want is jobs. We want jobs. We want people who are well-fed, well-educated, and happy. And we can take your pieces of paper from your Oslo agreements, and he told them exactly what they could do with it. He also said that if the Israeli authorities would allow him, he would take his militia into Ramallah, take Abu Mazen, and take him for a long drink from the Dead Sea. Well, this was the sort of thing he was saying. He was very, very passionate. And this is why he's basically, if you could read this article, I think you should send, maybe Elon, you could send that link to the rest of the group just to read at your own leisure. He's a pragmatist. He's completely a pragmatist. His view is we are here okay, we are here, the Jews are here in Judea and Samaria and in Israel, the Arabs are in Israel and in Judea and Samaria. We have to get along together. Nobody's going to kill everybody else. And we have to get along together such that all our population can have a decent living and have decent government. They do not have. So his idea is as follows. You probably heard that until COVID, there was something like, I think it was up by then to 50,000 work permits issued to Palestinians who were allowed back into Israel. I actually built a house in Yehud in 1991 onwards. It was after Oslo, and overnight with the first Intifada, I had no one to build my house. I had the agreement, I had everything, no laborers, no plasterers, no tilers, no people to help with the concrete, nothing, because all construction was Palestinian labor. And it took 2 years until they imported Chinese labor before things started to take off again in Israel's construction industry, which is ridiculous, because basically the only reason why we couldn't let in 500,000 Palestinians into work in Israel was the terrible security fears of the suicide bombers and everything else. So, Arafat's regime did not achieve anything for the betterment of the Palestinians. On the contrary, it created unemployment of over 400,000 Palestinians. What Ashraf and his group within the Chamber of Commerce want, they do not want work permits for Palestinians to work in Israel. They don't want them to have to drive to cross points, change vehicles, flash their ID cards in a code reader, and then go through and then get transport from that side. They sometimes have to set out at 4 in the morning to get to a job at 7 a.m. or 6:30 a.m. And then they've got to go through the whole process again. And they're not legally allowed to stay overnight in Israel proper. He says, I don't want that. I don't want my people having to go through that. I want Israeli businesses to set up in more and more industrial zones in Area C so that both Jews and Arabs can go freely to it. My people can drive their cars all the way to the factory, go and work. They get Israeli salaries with Israeli social benefits, and everything else. The minimum Israeli salary is 3 times what the minimum Palestinian salary is, and the social benefits don't. That's a different world. It's very, very. The Palestinian Authority is very much third world. They don't have those things. You don't have pension payments. You don't have holiday payments. You barely have any form of sick pay. You do not have health funds unless you pay into them privately. It's a whole different world. And Palestinians that work in Israeli companies have all those benefits, which is what they want. A family of 9 or 8 can live comfortably if just one is working in an Israeli factory. So that's what he wants. That's all he is interested in. He doesn't care for politics. He doesn't care for the conflicts. He says he's met with big Israeli industrialists and says, I want you to build factories in and around Hebron. We're not going to give you any trouble. I want jobs for my people. There are people like that, but not with the same clout as Ashraf in the northern part, in Samaria. But Samaria only has a very few large businesses. They're basically people like the building supply manufacturers, concrete works and things like that. And there's a very big cell company. But the biggest cell company used by Palestinians is actually an Israeli company because it's cheaper than the one run by al-Masri, the Palestinian plutocrat. Al-Masri, by the way, means the Egyptian. So we have 18 minutes left, and I want to go to talk about what has changed since 2016 and 18 in the development of the commerce in Judea and Samaria. So there's only been one hiccup. And this hiccup was when a man from Nablus came to his job in Barkan Industrial Zone on the outskirts of Ariel in Area C, drove himself in the morning and came with a pistol and shot his Jewish supervisor and one other person. This is an isolated incident. Someone had been wound up by the jihadists, and that is not generally the case. People who are working and people who are providing for their families, that's what they want. They don't want to get involved in some sort of jihadi campaign or what have you. the Trump administration tried to adopt a program that was in parallel, and it looked as if, they were saying, we're going to go ahead with this, but they actually didn't make any more progress, Gerard Kushner, than was already in place with Avi Zimmerman and Ashraf El-Jabari and the other 500, now 600 businesses that belong to the Judea and Samaria Chamber of Commerce. And that is probably let's say, the most important way forward. It's not, where's the border going to be? Which lines are we going to draw? Because that doesn't make better lives for people. It doesn't put food on people's table. And if you have people with secure environments and security of income to feed and clothe and educate their kids, then you have a calm environment. What is at the source of the problem with moving things forward today? And that, without any room for doubt, is to do with education. Why would the group of fanatics who attacked from Gaza in October last year, why would they have committed some of the unmentionable atrocities that they committed? It all comes down to education. Hamas, when it took control of Gaza Strip completely, the Israeli settlements were pulled out 2005, and we had then 17 years of rockets. My younger daughter lived in Sderot. She went to study. She did her degree in Sderot. She lived there 5 years. Figure it out, 5 years, about 1,900 days. She reckons she spent 600 in her home because of the rockets that you didn't hear about in the US, because it's, 3 a day, 2 a day. It's not news. It's only when it's 100 that it becomes news, or even more so, it only becomes news when Israel hits back, which is rather amusing, but that seems to be the case. So it's education. Give you an example. I, as a tour guide who works a lot with different Christian groups, I go into Bethlehem and Jericho very regularly. School books in Bethlehem do not show Israel as existing. These are school books from the Palestinian Authority. So if you're a young Palestinian growing up anywhere under the Palestinian Authority, that's all of areas A and B, and you're going to school and you're learning about geography and about your Palestinian nation, you have no idea why Haifa is occupied by Jews, so to speak. Why Jerusalem? Why is Tel Aviv not Jaffa and part of an Arab town? This is what their education is about. Not only that, but the media is absolutely full, in the written media and the broadcast media, of incitement against Israel. There has never once been, not for a moment, under the Palestinian Authority, education towards peace. This is why the poll carried out, I think it was by Gallup actually, inside West Bank cities, showed that the October 7th atrocities were supported by 78% of the population, the urban population in the West Bank. How could they possibly support such a thing? It's down to education. So there is no way, I don't know what, President Trump will come in and it will probably, maybe we will get involved, maybe you won't get involved. I know President Biden has tried to get involved, but you cannot impose, you can't come in from outside, not America or Russia or anybody else or France or whoever, and try and impose a situation which is untenable on people which are not ready for it. What we have is a status quo at the moment that actually works. It works because of the provision of employment within Area C, and to an extent a commercial boom in parts of Area A. We have every road in the West Bank, every road there, you'll see, as you drive, if you ever driven, any of you been to Israel, you've driven down the Jordan Valley Road or driven in any of the other roads, you've got Jewish traffic and Arab traffic on the same roads, and there's never a problem. And if there's a crash or something like that, is dealt with. It's either by the Israeli police and sometimes by the police. Sometimes if it's in more remote areas, it's in Area C, it may be the army that get there first and help whoever it is. If there are, there isn't actually a police force in Hebron. It's very interesting. Certainly not Israeli, it's Area A, but not Palestinian either, because the way they sort things out is the way the Native Americans used to sort things out. You get the heads of the tribes, they come together, they smoke a peace pipe. One side has to compensate the other for any damages they feel they lost, and that's the end of it. That's the end of the conflict till the next one pops up. That's how they solve things. Someone stole something, someone robbed something, they sort it out between the clan heads and they deal with it. It's a very traditional Arab way of running, let's say, policing society. So what would have to change in order that we could think in the future of a situation where Israel and Israelis could trust having a more sovereign version of a Palestinian entity in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip? It would mean that we would need to know that for the next 30 years, unlike the last 30 years, there has been a generation educated to understand that there are Jews and Arabs in this country, that they both have legitimate rights to be here. It doesn't matter those that immigrated on the British mandate, those that came later, it doesn't matter. This is the reality on the ground, and that no one group is going to annihilate the other group and shouldn't want to. And when you have a new generation which has been indoctrinated towards peaceful coexistence rather than murder, incitement, and delegitimization, then you have a chance of something coming together in the future. But at the moment, it is utterly impossible and impracticable. So that's as far as I would like to put it together. I was in business, so yes, I do have a business attitude to the whole thing. I do like Ashraf and Aviz and Gerald Kushner. I never met him, but I see what's happening, and I see these big industrial zones established near Hebron and at the back of Bethlehem and around Ariel, with tens of thousands of actually hundreds of thousands of Palestinians going to work there every day. They bring their cars, they park there. It's just, they live pretty normal lives, and they earn good living, and they manage to support a lot of people. Education tomorrow, education the next day, education in 10 years. It has to be education for coexistence in their territory, the way that Israeli kids are educated in the state system to coexistence. It has to be two-sided. That's the only way. This is not Holland and Belgium. It's not Luxembourg and Belgium either, and it's not even France and Germany. This is a very third world society with a very first world society trying to find a way to work together where one can benefit from the other. Each can benefit from the other. That would be my conclusion. And
wow.
What do you do now? We have questions, with discussion.
Yes,
How does
thank
it
you
work?
so much, Adrian. That was really informative, wonderful. I mean, I wanted to know if you wanted me to show either one of the other things you sent me. You had a settlements map and an Oslo main.
Yeah, please do. Just put the settlements map up. It's quite interesting.
Okay.
Because there's so little in the east. It's like it's a wasteland with no water. It's very, very
That one up.
difficult terrain.
Here we go.
You can see can you see the dot of dark green on the right hand side that goes from the top near the Jordan River and it goes down? That is the Alon Road, Yigal Alon Road. Those are the settlements were established under the Israel labor governments under Golda Meir and afterwards.
Here.
You can see that the brown area has become much denser because of the expansion of the big Arab towns in areas A, and you can see a further expansion of the dark and light yellow areas. It's now getting very complicated. What can I tell you?
These are such little
It seems
dots.
like there are no wild, in the middle of nowhere settlements being established. There are no, by the way, by the Palestinian authorities, they're establishing new communities, new settlements. They're called, I don't know, new towns, new villages. It's only the Jewish ones that are given this term settlement, which is unfortunately taken on a bit of a negative connotation. You know, where do you guys live in the United States? Everywhere you live is a settlement. Everywhere, without exception.
It's true.
So you can see they're dotted all over, but they're concentrated in certain areas. The areas like east of Hebron, the area around Jerusalem. Jerusalem has a major, population issue. demographic issue. The issue is that it has no way to expand. It's a city of very close to 1 million people, and it is landlocked. It's landlocked to the west by independent Israeli municipalities, Mevaseret Zion, and so on. It is landlocked to the south by Bethlehem. It is landlocked to the north by the Ramallah district, and it only has expansion space in the east into the uninhabited desert. As opposed to doing that, you can see this area to the right of Bethlehem. There's a big area of communities of settlements. One of those is Ma'ale Adumim, which has 65,000 residents, and it is directly opposite an Arab town that uses the same access road called El Azariah, which was a town that was started to be populated during the British Mandate by Arab migrants from Transjordan and Syria. Before that, it was just a small Christian village with 2 churches, one Orthodox, one Catholic. What's our other one? No, the other one is very similar to the Oslo things. We can do without that. Okay, so please can I end sharing, and we can. Anyone wants to? Seem to have lost everyone. What's going on?
The last Oslo main one is so small that you can't.
Yeah. Don't worry. And everyone knows the shape of the Gaza Strip, so it's not that important to show it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So anyway,
we do have some lunatics in our government at the moment. They're talking about trying to re-establish settlements. Anyone wants to put 100 Jews back among 2.1 million Arabs has got to be crazy, especially with the issues we have with the way Hamas control that territory. Where that goes in the future, we don't really know, because we have a government that's not made its mind up, unfortunately. But nobody in Israel wants anything to do with Gaza, with the Gaza Strip.
Right. It's all very complicated.
In fact, we issued, under the Bennett government, we issued 5,000 work permits to Hamas for Gazans in order that they would stop firing rockets. And it held for nearly a year. What we didn't realize is the people they were sending in were Hamas operatives who mapped out every single community around the Gaza Strip that they worked in. And that's how they knew exactly where to head for, exactly where the arms depots were, exactly where the clinics were, exactly where everything else were. They use it to map out the area. So there's a lot of issues with that.
I would love to say that if anyone wants to unmute and ask any questions, I'm sure
feel free.
I'd be happy to answer them. I saw one, David.
Yeah. Adrian, that's quite an illuminating discourse on a topic which is not widely understood by anybody, me certainly. And thank you for bringing out the details and the fragmenting that's happening there. I just have an oversight question, and that is the world in general seems to have Gaza in great disdain. They, as you say, they want anything to do with it. Does that feeling also go to the folks that you have been discussing today? Or is that just a Gaza type thing?
This is I can't go into full detail about it because it's a really deep question. The vast majority of the residents of the Gaza Strip, I mean, half of them are under the age of 15. They have very large families, but the vast majority of the families who are living in the Gaza Strip all have their roots in Egypt. Okay, they have the food they eat is Egyptian style food. Their Arabic dialect is Egyptian Arabic. And it's not because Egypt controlled that from 1948 to 1967. It's because they migrated and settled all along there, including in south of Jaffa, including another place, and all the way up the coastline in 2 waves. There was one wave in the 1830s under an Ottoman viceroy of Egypt called Muhammad Ali. They were called the Felakhin, which other Arabs from the West Bank area referred to them rather disparagingly as the Felakhin, which means the peasants or the peasant workers, which they were. They were penniless, landless Nile peasants who were given the opportunity to take over land and keep their own produce, not give 80% to their landlord. That was in the 1830s. About 60,000 moved up. And then we have, during the period of the British Mandate, especially 1923 to 36, immigration of a couple of 100,000 of Nile Delta Egyptians into the area, which, as a result of the 1948 war, they ended up in refugee camps back in Gaza. Gaza, very interestingly, there was a Christian priest called Adrian Weisberg, and he traveled to what he called the Holy Land in 1695 and did an amazing survey of the country. 1695. This is before Napoleon in 1799, long before the Ottomans were building modern armies and stuff like that, long before Western people were traveling and getting involved. And he describes Gaza as a Jewish town with a Christian minority. There wasn't a single mosque. Same with Hebron, a Jewish town. They all spoke Spanish. He spoke Spanish with them all. They're all Spanish and Portuguese Jews. The majority in Tiberias and Sfat as well were Spanish and Portuguese Jews. It was a very, very interesting. And Jericho was a small, tiny Jewish town of under 2,000 people with one church and the Greek Orthodox Church, a Greek Orthodox monastery, and a small community of about 200 Christians. It was just a completely different world. But the fact is that what we have today is what we have today. So why does no one want to touch Gaza? Because ethnically, the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Palestinians in Gaza have very, very few family ties. Very, very few. Most of them have absolutely none. They tried to, even when the PA was in charge of both areas, they couldn't unify them. And then when Hamas was in Gaza, there was no way they could unify them. So nobody really is interested in Gaza, but something has to be done about it. And Israel will not let, the logic is to let the Palestinian Authority, at least control the border crossing. But Israel's problem with that is we let them in, we give them an inch, they'll take a mile, and they'll continue their incitement just as the way Hamas did, and we'll be back to square one in 10 years, we'll have rockets again. No. What they're hoping, I think, that in the Israeli media, the general media, not the lunatic media, is that some arrangement will be found with Egyptian and sensible Gulf state policing to set up some form of civil administration, which can be at some point associated with the Palestinian Authority, but will start the reconstruction of Gaza and make sure that the aid and the materials that go in there are used for the betterment of their citizens and not for forming a new jihadi infrastructure. I honestly don't know where it's going to go.
Sure.
I don't think anybody really knows. And I think any politician from outside coming in and saying, "Oh, I've got the solution," is probably blowing hot air from the wrong orifice.
Yeah. Thank you. The word annex has been thrown around. What does it mean to you?
Something that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We're a democracy, and there's no way to get a majority supporting that. What they do want, there is a substantial support in Israeli society to make the areas of Area C, which have no Arab residents whatsoever, to annex them to the state of Israel, so that they've got the same civil sort of arrangements. At the moment, they're under the civilian administration. It's not like living in the rest of Israel.
Right.
They're beholden to the IDF's civil administration. They're not. There's not their own local government, even though they have their own councils. Yeah, it's not. It's talk, especially by people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, but it's just not going to happen.
Alana, you want to go through the questions?
Yeah, sure. So there's a comment from David. The Arabs should all be taught Hebrew. Says he's in the process of making Aliyah to Beit El. Okay,
I'll tell you something interesting is that when I go especially into Bethlehem with the groups I take in there, everyone over 50 speaks excellent Hebrew because they remember the days when Israel was in control, or they worked in Israel. And the young generation, nobody speaks Hebrew.
Nobody.
The Palestinians and Israelis, they communicate with each other. It's through English, because most Israelis don't take their Arabic studies seriously. Why? Because of what's been going on for the past 100 years. But unfortunately, not many do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to learn Hebrew unless they work in. I mean, the ones that work in the Ariel industrial zone and the Balkan industrial zone, they have to speak to their supervisors in Hebrew, and they've all learned Hebrew, and all of the workers have learned Hebrew. So yes, it's coming back.
Harry says, will there be a Marshall Plan for Gaza after things settle with Israeli control of where funds are spent, or something else?
That's what it's going to need. That's what it's going to need. And unfortunately, it can't be doing what the European Union does, which is, having a photo opportunity and handing a check for 5 billion to Abu Mazen, which he then puts 2.5 billion into his own pockets and the pockets of his cronies, and then maybe spends a bit of the rest on supporting his police force and everything else. The World Bank did an audit about 7 years ago into the Palestinian Authority. Out of 8.5 billion in aid that they received up to that point, nearly 3.5 billion was unaccounted for. Ooh. It's actually, we know where it is. It's sitting in the personal bank accounts of the Palestinian leaders in Paris, London, and Tel Aviv.
Yeah. Alan mentions, don't forget the people of Gaza voted for Hamas.
Yeah, the people of Gaza did vote for Hamas, but at the time, Hamas was not this insane jihadist militant group. They were more a social group. Hamas was given permission by the Israel Civil Administration to establish themselves, and they became like a charity organization. And then when they saw, look what the Palestinian Authority is doing, the Fatah in the West Bank, and they're sending suicide bombers, then we've got to do something, or we have no authority. And they took up arms and became who they are. But they didn't start that way.
I never knew that. I'm going to open this up. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask Adrian a question, feel free.
Yeah. There are so many issues as well that we're not even got into them, like the environmental issues, the treatment of sewage, the water sources. These are all very important.
Alan?
But I can tell you that the vast majority of Palestinians, in fact, the whole Gaza Strip virtually, and the vast majority of the Palestinians now get their water from Israel's desalination plants. And their electricity from electric power stations, which are nominally under a Palestinian electric company, but it is generated by the offshore gas in Israel's 17 gas-powered power stations. It didn't stop Hamas from rocketing the water plant and the power station in Ashkelon. It's quite
Alan has a question.
The hand that feeds you.
Going back to my comment about them voting for Hamas, Hamas had their charter at that time, didn't they, about destroying Israel and getting rid of all the Jews?
Yeah, it's not just in the Hamas charter, it's in the Palestinian Liberation Organization charter as well, the PLO, the PA. It needs serious education in a positive light for coexistence and a better future, not everything will be right when we kill a few Jews.
We've been saying that for years, though.
What's that?
We've been saying that for years.
Yeah, but people, especially in either U.S. administration, it doesn't matter, Republican or Democrat, they don't seem to understand that. They believe that pieces of paper and political agreements can solve solutions. They cannot. They never have, and they never will.
The best picture of Neil Young.
Yeah. You need to give people livable solutions. Anyone else? Anybody else?
Very interesting. I
hope I've not put you all to sleep.
I did like it.
Let's see. As far as education, I was referring. I was thinking that Hebrew, learning Hebrew by the Arabs would empower the Palestinians or the Arabs to be able to learn a little bit about Israeli culture and history and other things, to be able to be educated, as was said.
I think it would be a lot easier to have in their education books teaching them about the background to the a realistic background to the country in their own language where they can understand it. Anything that will help them understand that, in spite of the Palestinian Authority telling them otherwise, Tiberias doesn't belong to them, Haifa doesn't belong to them, Tel Aviv doesn't belong to them, Beersheba doesn't belong to them. That's not the way it goes. But I keep coming back to education all the time. So teaching Hebrew would help. It would certainly help. They would be able to listen to maybe to our media or radio or what have you, maybe connect a bit more. We do have everything's in signs and everything are all over Israel in Arabic. There are residents of it's mainly the Christian communities in Bethlehem, which are dwindling terribly. They're now a tiny 11% of their own city in Bethlehem, 89% Muslims. Several of them, especially the business leaders, they can drive their Palestinian vehicles to Ben Gurion Airport and leave the country from Ben Gurion Airport. They have the security clearance to do that. Most Palestinians that want to leave, they have to go out through Jordan. It's a bit of an imposition, and if people get a bit more wealth, they will want to travel a bit. There's going to have to be a solution to that.
Now is Al Bira still Christian? Because when I was in
Al Bira's tiny Christians community, the Palestinian under the direct control of the Palestinian Authority since Oslo, the Christian population has dwindled by close to 80%. They've emigrated. I had a very when I was during COVID, this summer of it would have been 21, the summer of 21, we suddenly had the Delta virus came, and the government, which I believe was Bennett's government, imposed quarantine again, just as the congressional group was due to come with Heather Johnson and everybody. And I was booked to guide that tour, and they were left with the agent. She was stuck here, the agent who organized it all from Birmingham, Alabama, the travel agent. And she said, Adrian, I'm stuck here. They can't come. There's no way senators and people from the House representatives are going to come for a 5 days quarantine for a 4-day tour. They've just canceled. So I'm stuck here. Take me to see something that I've not seen before. So I took her to Herodian. I took her and showed her some interesting archaeology stuff. And then we went into Beit Sahor, which is the Christian, nearly 90% Christian village. It's actually a whole borough these days, just down the hill from Bethlehem to the east of Bethlehem. And we went into a restaurant, a Christian restaurant, just wanted a coffee, but there'd been a huge fire in the Jerusalem forest, and the soot was all over the tables in this place in Bethlehem. It was an enormous fire. And we were chatting, because it was already almost it was coming up to Labor Week. It was like the week before Labor Day. And she asked them, she said, do you get busy at Christmas in Bethlehem still? And the owner said, well, we get some visitors, but not a lot. Tourism tends to slack off. People want to be at home with their families for Christmas. He said, but most of us want to go abroad. And she's like, are you crazy? This is Bethlehem. This is the city that, Jesus was born in. They've got the massive Christmas tree. Why don't you want to go to he said to her, this is a man in his 40s. He said, over my dead body, will I go to celebrate Christmas in Manger Square in Bethlehem? And she said, but I don't understand. It's under, the restrictions. He said, no, there are no restrictions. He said, that's the entire problem. So when Israel was in control of the West Bank and in control of Bethlehem, there were iron police barriers entirely around the square. And you could not get into that square unless you showed an Israeli policeman your ID card and you were a Christian. If you weren't a Christian, you weren't allowed in. He said, today, the tens of thousands of Arab young men from the south of Bethlehem area come in on Christmas hoping to molest Christian girls. He said, I've got 3 daughters. Oh, but my dead body, I'm not going to Manger Square. And I found that not so much disturbing as extremely sad. So they don't feel that the Palestinian Authority protects them. And they're leaving. They're leaving in droves. It is sad. I think it's very sad.
Are there any other questions? Yep. Any other questions?
How I got onto that. I'm sorry, it was tangential.
Yep. Just raise your hand. Unmute yourself if you have a question. Adrian obviously is in command of an unbelievable number of dates and places and people and history. Adrian, what did you do before you became, well, I guess you explained what you did, but how did it lead you to become a tour guide?
I had a teacher when I was 14 years old in school, a history teacher who gave me like stuck a match up my backside to do with history. I was fired up on studying history, and I have been ever since. And then I had a late father-in-law who was as an amateur archaeologist, and so I got studied that into archaeology. Yeah. And then I was once at a Shabbat meal in Erev Shabbat meal in Tel Aviv at a relative of my ex-wife, and he asked me would I reach for a bigger tablecloth on this cupboard at the top of it. I opened this cupboard, and it was like wall-to-wall files. And I'm like, Heidi, are you mad? All my university files I left back at home in my parents' attic, and eventually I'll throw them away. What are you going to do? She said, no, that's not. I did a course for 2 years here, and I didn't pass the exams. I said, what is it? I said, I thought of becoming a tour guide. I said, oh, okay. I said, what's the file? So I pulled something down, and it was in-depth history of the Ottoman Empire. And I spent like sociomatic the whole evening. I was just into her history files, and I thought, I have got to do this course. Whether I want to become a tour guide or not, I don't know, but I've got to do this course. So I had this fire for it beforehand. And I feel very, very much that if I don't know something, I'm not going to go to social media to find out facts. You don't find facts out on social media. You find them out in the writings of ancient writers. You find them out in empirical facts that are recorded by independent sources. And so I just autodidactic in that sphere where I feel I don't know something. Very often I'm asked on tours questions, I just don't have an answer. I say, I'm going to come back to you. And it may be like 2 weeks after the tour, I'll send them an email saying, okay, I've got your answer. This is it, because I researched it. That's what I do.
Well, you certainly have the command, and you've succeeded. Congratulations.
I'm trying to produce a pamphlet. I've been trying since before COVID. But I've been told it needs to be a little bit more than a pamphlet, which is basically the history of the population in this entire land from beginnings of time. And it covers some very, very interesting areas of this 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries that the information's out there, but very few people know. Did you know that one of the directors of Harvard University was out here in the 1870s describing the country as a bitter, miserable, abandoned area? He described, and this was Mark Twain, this is like a little bit after Mark Twain, he described the Sea of Galilee as being, obviously he's a Christian, he's reading these stories, right? 80% of the gospel stories take place around the Sea of Galilee. And it was this miserable landscape. There was nothing there but dust and shrubs and a few Bedouin. And he described it as utterly tragic. People don't know how fast the development's been and how quick the migration was, especially from Syria, Transjordan, Egypt, and Arabia during the British Mandate. Nearly 700,000. And you can go back to a statement in the Boston Post, not the Globe, stated in March 1942 by Robert Kennedy. And he was echoing something that had already been said a few weeks earlier by Winston Churchill. And his statement was this: the Jews in Palestine point with pride to the fact that between 1923 and 1936, 650,000 Arabs have migrated into the British Mandate in search of better living and work opportunities than they had where they came from. That's the foundation of who the Palestinians are. I've never found a Palestinian business older than 1923.
Interesting.
Yeah, but the facts on the ground are the facts on the ground. You can't argue with them today. We have to deal with today, not with what was around in 1923 or at the end of the British Mandate. We just have to move forward and make sure that we're doing positive things.
Okay. Any other questions for Adrian today? You want to wrap up,
See,
Lana?
Richard Scott is nodding. Did you want to ask something? Oh, okay.
Else has any more questions? We can just thank Adrian for coming
Okay.
and talking to us. We really appreciate it. This is sort of how we've stayed connected to Israel as volunteers who usually go during a time. We started before, during COVID when we couldn't go, and now that we're able to go again.
Right.
There's so much we're keeping going with it. So thank you so much. And
thank you. Can I just say that when Julia connected me to you, she said to me, "This is a group from the broad spectrum of the political and religious thing. Be objective." I hope you felt that I was being objective.
Yeah, no, it was great. No objective.
Very good. Yeah, this is an international group, and this presentation will be up on YouTube in a couple of days. And to get there, you can go to youtube.com/volunteers for Israel. And this will be the very first, and there'll be 200 after it.
Okay, I wish you luck.
Very good. Well, thank you again, Adrian, for taking the time to spend with us. You've opened up our eyes in areas which are not well described elsewhere.
I know.
Worthy of
because people are concentrating on other narratives, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think we're going to hear more and more about what you've discussed as we go forward with all the crazy things that are proceeding in the Middle East. It's not going to get quieter; it's just going to get louder. And you've made our understanding of pieces of it now, filled in some of the dots. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. At this point, we will do two things. We'll stop recording, and secondly, we'll move into schmooze mode. And schmooze mode means that we can all